Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform, we're going to dive into Red Hat Ansible Tower, which is our kind of our scale kind of level of the platform. So when we talk scale and tower, we want to always talk about control, delegation, and obviously a kind of repeat word, scale, is when two or more people start doing automation together, right? When I have me and another individual and we both have playbooks and we're running from our laptops, there's not a lot of value in me running automation and then this individual running automation, and then we're both automating the same thing. Now you can get smarter and smarter tools, but how do you know when whoever ran what automation? Like, where do you track this? And if you want to run more and more automation, like at some point your laptop can only run so much. And Ansible is extremely powerful, but you can only get a couple hundred instances automated from a pretty powerful laptop before you need to start scaling this up. So when two or more people start doing automation together, Tower becomes interesting, because now an individual can create automation and then the other person can click in a web UI and kick off that automation. So now you're not having to reinvent the wheel, and then you have a single kind of a choke point where automation can be executed, because you also don't want to be having 4 or 5 computers automating the same piece of infrastructure at the same time. That doesn't make sense. So control, delegation, scale. So what is Ansible Tower? Why do I care? What's it do? It has a bunch of features that enterprise users want. It has role-based access control. It can integrate with things like LDAP, Azure, a dozen other things, including like TACAX, Radius, and then you can actually take those existing users rather than reinventing the wheel again, and then you can apply, like, this user can only run this playbook, and this playbook only really grabs information. It doesn't actually configure anything, right? So you can actually kind of divide things up by architect teams, dev teams, what inventories are allowed to access, and et cetera, et cetera. Push button deployment, this means like you can hand someone who's a non-technical user who's still tech savvy, and he can click a button and then something happens and he automates it. And it could do something like, imagine you have a customer and they have a security team that gets audited all the time. You could create a playbook that audits the information that this audit team wants all the time, and they can just press this button, and this playbook could be a read-only playbook that actually isn't configuring any infrastructure. So you can kind of create guardrails and automate kind of routine processes that are happening for that organization. Obviously, because we created this choke point, all automations are centrally logged, and on top of doing our own logging, we can actually export to a variety of tools, including Elk and Splunk, and again, probably a dozen other things. I'd have to look in the drop-down. And then again, we can do orchestration as we actually have workflows, and I'll expand on that in the slide below. Oops, I don't know what it popped over there. Oh, because the phone's going on. A scam. So just like we had all these kind of value props of what engine was, I have the same value props trying to load them out. I pretty much described all of these, so I'll just kind of dive into each one in kind of order. Here's an architectural diagram of kind of where Tower fits within that ecosystem of tools. Is you have these use cases of equipment. We have all the stuff we can automate. We connect to that stuff through transport layer, like SSH, for example. We don't create our agent or like a proprietary connection mechanism. We connect to it just like a user would connect to it. So engine sits there, the modules, the actual engine, and being able to talk to equipment. These playbooks now are loaded by Tower, and Tower sits on top. And Tower becomes your user interface for automation. Off to the side there, I'm going to elaborate more in a little bit. I'm watching the time to make sure I'll get it covered, is cloud.redhat.com. These launch November 14th, so you folks, again, are seeing the newest stuff, and I take feedback, and you can always email me at seanc@redhat.com if something's confusing, because it'll be super helpful to me. So everything in Red Hat Ansible Tower revolves around this concept of a job template. So we have all these cool things like role-based access control and integrations with all these tools, but when you take Tower down to its core functionality, the most important thing is the concept of a job template. Now, a job template means an inventory, which, what am I running automation against? A credential, how do I log into that device or appliance or cloud, whatever it happens to be. It could be a token, it could be a username and password, and then a project. And that project's tied to a playbook. So we make this really flexible, is that folks can create playbooks that can run on different inventories. And these job templates are the basis, they're the skeleton of what makes Ansible Tower powerful. So again, an inventory, a credential, a project. Everything revolves around this within Red Hat Ansible Tower. So an inventory is just like an inventory for Ansible Engine. It can even import a direct INI file directly into it. But what you'll see, folks, as they scale is they either have dynamic inventory, or they'll have a GitHub project where they're sourcing inventory, or they'll have a mix of a bunch of different types. Credentials. So we can actually store credentials. We're actually certified for JITC, for U.S. government, to sync credentials and encrypt them. You can see here, once you put a credential in here, you can actually see it. However, what we see with a lot of customers is they are already using credential management. So the two that we see a lot are CyberArk and HashiVault. Those are the two big 800-pound gorillas that happen in a lot of customer environments. And of course, we don't reinvent the wheel. We just can grab the credential information directly from these tools, and we don't have to change the paradigm for how a customer manages credentials. In fact, we highly encourage that, and we think it's a great idea, and we're not really in the credential management game. However, we have a pretty powerful credential management built into the tool. And then a project. A project can be as simple as a GitHub repo, and a lot of the examples I do are open source GitHub repos, but this can be Mercurial, Subversion, it can be a flat file, it can be your own on-prem Git and something like Stash. It really doesn't matter. We're just loading code from wherever you tell it to load code from. And if it's a GitHub repo, we can actually do a lot of interesting things because we can clean it each run, we can grab the newest version, we can grab a branch from a particular piece of code. Again, we're not trying to reinvent Git. We just grab something popular like Git. We don't want to reinvent how you manage code. All right, so everything revolves around a job template. The next biggest feature after you understand what a job template is we have an API. We have an extremely powerful API, and we're an API-driven tool, meaning everything that's in the UI is second thought after the API. So once the API can do something, then the UI functionality is built in. A lot of times when you see tech previews, functionality can go into the API before it even reaches the UI. So this means you don't have to have customers use Tower directly, but it can act as the interface in how you program jobs. So for example, like, I don't know, I don't have a slide on this, but there's I have ServiceNow demos I show where the interface for folks can be something like ServiceNow. And when you click whatever process or ticket or whatever you want to do within a business rule in ServiceNow, it just fires off basically a URI request, like a curl, whatever you want to call it, an API request to Red Hat Ansible Tower with credential information or OAuth tokens. And then it kicks off whatever orchestration, job templates, et cetera, that you want. And vice versa, we can talk to these systems. So it becomes a bidirectional conversation. So this is one of the most important things to customers because this is how they integrate with existing tools within their IT infrastructure, is no tool is being used in a vacuum. And that's why Ansible wins and does so efficiently, is that it's always been thought of as not how we solve everything, but it integrates with everything. So the API is important for that bidirectional communication. Like Ansible can easily on the command line automate other things, but for you to have any type of back and forth, you need an API to be able to kick off automation. And you might not want like users to log into Tower. You might only want administrators, and then you can have a system like a Remedy or ServiceNow or whatever you want to be that kind of front end for how you manage IT process. RBAC, here's just like a little screenshot. We can now assign these job templates we've built that run automation to a specific user, specific team, or a specific organization. The highest level tier within Ansible Tower is an organization, and then you have a team, and then you have users. And you can easily select, you see in the UI or the API, and set up job templates. We have enterprise authentication, so we integrate. I kind of brought this up before. This is Google OAuth 2 is one that I didn't say, and obviously SAML. You can see that it's literally push button integration in here, so it's trivial for setup. Centralized logging. Here's the drop down. You can see Logstash, Splunk, Loggly, Sumo Logic, other. It's very flexible to be able to use your existing logging tool if you don't want to use the native logging on Tower. Workflows. So this is another big feature. if API is the #1 feature, I would say workflows is the #2 feature, in my opinion. Workflows allows me to daisy chain job templates. And not only daisy chain job templates, like run this job template with these 5 tasks and run this job template with these 5 tasks, but I can put conditionals on these. So if this job template fails, run this job template. If this job template that failed then succeeds, then merge back into this. It's called convergence, or coming back into a straight line. So we have this ability to have some logic. In addition, we don't want to replace a IT process tool like ServiceNow, but we do have limited workflow approvals within Tower. So you can actually stop a workflow midway through and make it so a certain user with RBAC controls says, okay, this looks good, continue on. That's pretty powerful, and it's a good way to start that too, because automation isn't all or nothing. We want to start in small increments and build up automation. That's kind of how I always try it in a bottom-up approach. So if you want to get to that business logic, this is a nice stepping stone to getting to something that might integrate with an existing tool. With the platform launch, we're also going to have webhooks. Specifically, this means that we don't need to integrate with something like Jenkins if you want to simplify the process. So basically, if I push code, let's say I changed a playbook, this playbook change could kick off a playbook on Ansible Tower. So basically, the API of Tower can be talked to directly from something like GitHub or GitLab. So this means a full cycle CI/CD system using Red Hat Ansible Tower. We don't need to use an outside CI system, even though we can integrate with them. And there's lots of examples of Tower with something like Jenkins out there. But this is extremely powerful, and this is available in the platform launch. And obviously, I kept saying the word scale, and scale's on a bunch of different slides. Scales allows us to kind of take that automation and then just multiply effect, right? So if we have tested on my dev environment with 20 rail boxes, and now I want to run on 10,000 rail boxes simultaneously for whatever reason, I can now just build up clusters of Red Hat Ansible automation. And if I have a Kubernetes environment in OpenShift, I can just continually flex up runner nodes basically to flex that automation as big as I need to, depending on the capacity of that OpenShift cluster. So it will look like a unified web UI. So it won't look any different than a single Tower cluster. And then you can do things like slice jobs across it. A lot of this is going to be taken care of automatically, just depending on maximum capacity and how much you assign to that job. Are there any questions on Tower? Again, realizing that it's a crash course before I get into the cloud.redhat.com. And super thank you for turning the chimes off, because I think I was going crazy.
Yeah, there's no questions in the Slack. I think you're good, and I agree on the chimes.
Yeah, thanks. So engage with users in automation-focused experience. What we're doing is we had a lot of customers asking us, how do you measure success with automation, right? Like, we helped the community when Ansible first launched. We got folks starting to automate boring things, and it became like wildfire, and people really loved Ansible, and everyone's heard about Ansible. Then we have, like, obviously the revenue generator for Ansible, the company before Red Hat bought it, was proprietary Tower. And we've open sourced Tower, and Tower is extremely powerful for organizations because of all the things we just talked about. But like, what's the next step? Like, how do you take this even farther as a platform? And what we really wanted to see was, hey, what is community versus supported? And we're going to talk about Automation Hub. And how do I share content between my team or get the latest content from partners? And I'll elaborate on that. And the other one is analytics. How do I measure success of my automation? How do I see what automation is successful? And how do I compare groups or gamify this or do chargebacks? Like, there's all this additional functionality that Tower is not really built for. So we kind of created this next layer, and we're hosting this as software as a service on cloud.redhat.com. So let me kind of jump into these. We want to gain knowledge around automation, right? That's automation analytics. We want to collaborate. That's Automation Hub. So those are two different software as a service tools or offerings on cloud.redhat.com. And then we have this idea of collections. A collection is is content, and content refers to what we talked about in the engine part. Content refers to plugins, modules, and playbooks in the form of what we call roles. And then how do you know if Joe Schmo or Jane Doe, right, created a playbook in their spare time that's not supported, and like a company like F5 creates certified content? And then we've created Automation Hub to help kind of be that layer, that downstream version of Galaxy around what content is supported. So let's dive into these. So what is automation analytics? It's software as a service. It's hosted on cloud.redhat.com. It includes a visual dashboard, health notification, and organizational statistics. So what we are aiming for is creating an automation center of excellence. The persona for someone using automation analytics is someone looking at holistic automation across the enterprise. It's probably not interesting to an individual automator or like a network administrator or a system administrator. It's something interesting to automation holistically for the enterprise. Like which organizations are using the most automation. You can kind of gamify this. Utilization rates of your capacity. Like, is this one group eating 90% of my capacity for my clusters? And like, what does that look like? Enterprise success rates, right? How many job templates are failing? And like, if I have a cluster in Japan and a cluster in Denver and a cluster in Germany, and I see lots more failures in Japan, I can easily see this now and kind of dive in and be like, okay, what's going on? Why are we having no failures in Germany, but in Tokyo we have like a ton of different things going on here? Dive in, and then you can click and keep diving in to see what's going on. So when we go look at the dashboard, the red indicates a job template failure, so a job failed on an individual cluster. A green means a job succeeded, and we can kind of graph this over time, past week, past couple of weeks, past month, and it can gain this information for all clusters. We can see the top used job templates, and we can see the top modules. This is important because we can see kind of adoption of certain job templates and have that kind of aha moment, like, why is this job template so popular? And kind of dive in and figure out, like, what's making this job template successful, but not this other one we put all this time and effort into. Top modules could be really important because you could use a non-stateful module that's kind of like a hack to get around automation, which is basically kind of like glorified bash, where you're just running little commands. You can be like, hey, we shouldn't be using this module. Why are we using it, and what's the problem? And let's talk to Red Hat about fixing this, or this partner, to make sure like this isn't a problem. Or this module is deprecated, or this a certain vendor has told us not to use this module. It'll instantly pop up there, and you'll kind of see that module being used. In fact, this happened with the QE system as we were developing this. Is one of the developers didn't know this module he was using was about to be deprecated. And I was like, hey, can we change these examples? We don't recommend using this module anymore. And then it came up immediately. So it is something that just came up even in our own kind of demonstrations of it. Health notifications, it's fairly limited in the platform launch, but things we're thinking of is license capacity when you're nearing it across multiple clusters. This is something that's kind of a problem for customers today, is if they have different clusters, there's not holistic management of the licensing for it. We'll know if a cluster's down. We can know if a node within a cluster's down. We'll know the last time data is imported. But if anyone's ever familiar with something called Red Hat Insights, it has a rules engine that can do interesting things. So these notifications are very pluggable. And since this is software as a service, as we get more and more data from customers after the platform launch, we can do interesting things with that data. It can be like, when we see this data set, it usually means this, and we can perform this notification around it. So that can get really interesting really quickly. So in this initial launch, it's fairly limited, but this will probably be broken out in its own tab eventually, in addition to like this kind of card that's on the main page. And I think you're going to see a lot more about health notifications, because I think it's kind of the secret weapon of automation analytics, in my own opinion. Now we have this idea of organizational statistics. This was actually something that we jointly saw at a couple customers that was super interesting. Is they wanted to compare groups. They wanted to compare what job templates were being used by these groups, and they kind of turned this into gamification. So kind of the two use cases I see for organizational statistics is gamification, meaning like kind of getting people interested in automation and measuring success of like automation for the groups to kind of make them competitive, but in a fun way. We also kind of see this as potentially a way for chargebacks. So if you have a group running Ansible clusters, they could start seeing like, hey, this group of the budget is using 50% of capacity, so it's not really fair that they're only paying 10% into this fund for running this infrastructure, or our salaries for that particular group, depending on what it needs. Now, we're going to work with customers, our partners, obviously IBM, to figure out how this data is more and more useful as we kind of iterate over it. But it's extremely kind of cool to see, and our customers were really the driving force before creating this. Job runs by organization refers to a job template. So if I had 100 job templates, I could see here that the network group is doing like, I don't know, a fifth, less than a fifth of all job capacity. And the blue, the default group, like immediately it was like, why are we still running jobs in the default group? We should put it in the right group and classify it. Usage refers to tasks. So the reason we have these two graphs is we might have job templates that have like 3 tasks each, and you're running lots of job templates. And another group might have one job template, but it has 1,000 tasks in it, right? Because it's extremely flexible. So this allows us to kind of look at the automation capacity in like 2 different ways really quickly at like a 1,000-foot level. Why can't I just use the Tower UI versus an automation analytics UI is Tower has no concept of top. It has no module data. It's only looking at individual cluster, which is like a physical location, like US East 1 in AWS. Analytics is looking holistically across it. It has a concept of top. It can filter by clusters and compare things and kind of drill down and do breakdowns between different groups. Hopefully that's helpful. Really quick on collections. I mentioned this quickly before, just in the brevity of time. Collection is just a content package. It's a new iteration for anyone familiar with Ansible on roles, because it allows us to actually share content quickly. A collection can look like this. It's literally a file structure for how to share data. It's a standardized way to share it. And then we can actually include modules within these, so we can run modules from different collections and make it super simple for a vendor to share it. I'll kind of elaborate that on the hub slide. Automation hub. So a lot of folks will refer to this as like a catalog for content, these collections. I kind of refer to it as like a smartphone, right? If we have an app store, the app store is hub, and then collections are the apps. These are pre-built content. It can be playbooks, it can be modules that allows us to distribute it. One second, I'm just trying to make sure they're quiet outside the hall. This is also powerful. In addition to like getting content, is we've decoupled content from engine. So we're able to distribute content as fast as reasonable for a particular customer. So what this means is what was happening in the past is every release of engine, partners were trying to get content in. Someone like F5 was like, we need to get this content in for the next release of Ansible. And then a customer doesn't want to be in a development branch, they want to be on a supported branch because they're an enterprise company. They had to wait till that next version of Ansible, which could be 4 months away. Now what we've done is by decoupling the platform from the content, we're able to, partners can now deliver content as fast as they want, and it's just installing new modules on top of that supported engine. So this is extremely powerful for the support policy as well. And we'll be able to see what content is supported versus what stuff is not supported. I think if there's anything else. So we're at the last 5 minutes. I have a bunch more slides that you'll see that go into each of the individual use cases. The lab today, we're going to focus on RHEL, and I'll go over that I think at 1:30 is the time. But we have a lot of different ways for folks to get started. This is what we advertise to customers as they learn. I'm sure Cloud Pak's going to have its own go-to-market training, but it's probably good for field teams to know about how we're going to market. So this is the kind of slide we show our customers is how they get started. Is we actually have a get started page. We have a Tower trial. We really want customers to try Tower, not AWX, which is the upstream open source version of Tower, because they're not the same. They're not the same at all, and it should be trivial for them to get a license and try the real stable product. The most annoying is not the right word. A frustrating problem is a customer that wants to pay us and is evaluating the platform, downloads open source AWX, and then complains about something that's not in the actual product. It's the equivalent of someone downloading Fedora saying they don't like it, so they don't want RHEL, when in fact, like, the problem they're talking about was solved by RHEL because it's a stable, supported enterprise product. So I think it is important to understand, like, the upstream, what it is moving development branches for experimenting, and the persona customer is a developer for that thing, where the product, the persona customer, is a operator, a user, someone who wants a stable, tested, certified platform, right? So Tower Trials there. Join the community. Now, the reason open source software is so extremely powerful depends on who you talk to, but for me, like, the reason is accessibility. Is it's really easy to get your question answered without having to wait, and not everything's a support ticket. Like, we greatly value Red Hat support. It's the number one thing we're selling in a lot of these cases, right, is the support and credibility and a trusted advisor for this stuff. But if it's just like learning, and I want to learn on my laptop, it's extremely easy to get started. There's no blocking of folks to get playing with Ansible. I have Ansible running on my Mac right now, provisioning your workshop for this afternoon. This, to me, is, if I was talking to folks about open source software, that's an OpEx play. You're saving operations costs because it's extremely easy to get trained, certified, learn, become an expert in something really trivially, versus something that's proprietary and very unique to a specific customer. We have free workshops on ansible.com/workshops. We do them all over the place. A lot of the same content you saw today, obviously a lot longer and more in depth. We have training that we sell. And obviously, I don't know all the, I'm sure IBM can sell this too, but we have courses that our Ansible team works with our Red Hat training team, and they create really excellent content in like 4 or 5 day boot camps on specific like Ansible use cases, like Windows automation or network automation, or just Tower and like deep dives on how Tower works. And of course, we have social media as well. That's a great way just to follow if you want news and updates and platform launches and demos and et cetera, et cetera. With that, I'm at the end of the hour. Here's a bunch of links. Hopefully there's at least one question